Hi, I'm Tanya. What we're going to cover today is what actually is UX design. So first I want to talk about what UX design is and also, more importantly, what it is not. I also want to cover today the difference between UX and UI because a lot of people get these mixed up. And then we're going to talk about some UX methods and I'm going to go through a quick case study with you to show you what the end-to-end process looks like for UX and user-centered design. So a little bit about me. My name is Tanya Lang. I'm the trainer, coach and principal of Peak XD, Peak Experience Design, which I founded in 2003. So I've got a bunch of degrees and qualifications, but really, you know what? Most of what I've learned is from my 20 years of doing UX. So hopefully I can impart some of that knowledge over these lessons to you. So our mission at Peak XD, which our whole team is on board with, is really to empower others to improve the world through human-centered design. So what do we know about UX? Well, we've completed over 500 UX projects since 2003. Now I want to talk about what is UX and user-centered design and also what it is not. So first of all, it's not what I would call developer or designer-centered design. So often as developers and designers, we try and make interfaces and websites easy to use, but the problem is your customers don't necessarily think like you. So sometimes your designer might be very sort of tech savvy, but your customers may not know some of those conventions. So I liken it to playing Pictionary for users, in that the users, your customers, have to try and guess what the designer or the developer was thinking. So this is not a great approach. Another one which we see all too much of is what I would call technology or vendor-centered design. This is when your IT area or your vendor is basically telling you what you can and can't have. So the interface is often being driven by the software vendor or by your IT department. So sometimes we have the technology first, and then we work out what our requirements are, and it's a little bit like fitting a square peg in a round hole. So that's not a great approach either. The third one, which you'll probably see in the organisations that you've worked with, is what I call organisation or company-centred design. This is when the needs of your stakeholders tend to sort of dominate the content or the features of your website. Sometimes the menu structure aligns with your organisational structure, but the problem is your customers don't think like you. So this is not a great approach either. So what is user experience design? A user experience, first of all, is a person's perceptions and responses resulting from the use of a product, system, or a service. User-centered design is a very different approach. It's more like a philosophy. It involves understanding your users. Who is your target audience? What are the tasks? What are they actually trying to do on your site or your system? What's the technology or the equipment available to them? And what's the environment in which they operate? So all of these things are really useful to understand about your users. So you might have heard of UX, user experience, CX, customer experience, UCD, user-centered design, HCD, human-centered design, EX, that's not your X, that's employee-centered design. These are all terms or phrases that you might hear. So no matter what you call it, they're all pretty much the same thing. It's really about putting people at the center of your design process. So the only thing that is a little bit different is what I'd call UX versus UI. To me, they are a little bit different. So this is my little formula. So UI equals UX minus U. In other words, if you take the users out of the equation, if you're not consulting with your customers or your users, if you're not involving in the research phase, in the design phase, testing your concepts with those users, then it's not really UX design. UX design really needs to involve your customers in that process. So you might be a really good UI designer, but UX is a lot more encompassing. It's about that whole experience, not just the interface design. So UI design is a little bit closer to sort of visual design. Now I want to talk about some of the different design methods and the approach that we use. So this is a typical UX design process. We'll often start with that discovery or research phase. We go out and before we design something, we work out what is the problem that we're trying to solve. So we go out, we talk to our customers, we do research, we find out what their problems and issues and pain points are, and also their goals or the requirements. We then sort of start to ideate and sort of design concepts, sketches, get ideas out. We're trying to get the right design and the right concept before we get the design right. So we're testing concepts. And then we're testing and iterating. So we test our concepts and then we iterate the design and then ideally we test them again. And then after our site goes live, we want to ongoing sort of evolve that site and evaluate it. And then we often sort of start the process again. So this is the typical end-to-end UX design process. I want to take you through a bit of a case study because just to explain how it all kind of fits together. So this is a customer-centered design approach that we did for a university for their student portal. So our brief was very much to design the ideal user experience for students. So this was a luxury. Often, the technology is first, but we were told we want you to design the ideal experience and then we will source the technology to enable that experience. So that was our brief. So we started off, we did some customer research. We spoke to students. We did lots of focus groups and journey mapping workshops. We used a lot of techniques in those workshops to understand the individual ideas and requirements for each of the students. So we do activities like with lots of post-it notes and affinity diagramming, to really understand what were the key things that students were after, both when they started and also when they were getting closer to their assessment periods. We then took that qualitative data and we incorporated that into an online survey. So once we had that data, it helped us prioritize the requirements and what was important to the actual students. We then sort of documented our sort of research. So we did things like personas. We also wrote a user requirements document highlighting things like the sort of different systems that they wanted to access and features and functions and content, the priority and things like that. So a sort of lengthy user requirements document and things like user stories. We then worked out, what is the customer's mental model? So in other words, how do they think? How do they group information? So we then did what we call a card sorting activity. This is a way to understand what we call the customer's mental model. So what we do is we give people cards, we get them to group those cards and give each group a name or a label that describes the things in that grouping. Then we use that, we look at that data, and then we analyze the themes that came out of that. So this is a way of sort of helping us design the information architecture or the menu structure of a site that aligns with the customer's mental model and the words and terminology that they use. We then took that data and we ran what we call an information architecture design session with our clients. So we got some of the key stakeholders in, we got the results from the card sorting, and then we sat down and we worked out the top level menu structure or the information architecture. We then did a co-design sessions or several co-design sessions with students. We got them to sketch out, what do you want to see day to day when you go to the student portal? And we found out what's important to them. So they wanted to see their online courses. They wanted to access things like the calendar and their emails and things like that. So it was a way of requirements gathering. After those co-design sessions with the students, we then ran some co-design sessions with our stakeholders. So we took the student results from the co-design and then we sort of mashed that up with what the business needed to achieve. So this was a great way to sort of get that customer focus, but also to get the stakeholders on board, which is really, really important in a UX design process, to bring your stakeholders on the journey. So the other thing we did are wireframes. So just like an architect does a blueprint for a house, but the blueprint doesn't specify the interior decoration or design of that house. So we do wireframes or blueprints for a website. So generally they're black and white and they indicate the content or the functions on the page and the approximate real estate, but not the exact sort of visual design. So generally they're black and white and a bit bland, but they're good for testing purposes to see if we've got the right content and features that people are looking for. Then what we do is we take those and we test them. So we did both moderated face-to-face testing, sitting down with a participant one-on-one, and also we do activities like remote testing where we send them a link and a little bit of a test that they sort of do in their own time. And from that, we can see where the design's doing well and the areas that we need to sort of improve or iterate a little bit. So these are the sort of wireframes that we create. And this is the sort of test results. So we can see the little heat areas of people of where they clicked. So if they're not clicking on the right thing, we need to go back and iterate the design. We also tested the information architecture using a tool called TreeJack. So this tests the information architecture in isolation of any visual or content. So it's really a bunch of links and the participants click on the link that they expect to find the answer. And then we get some good quant data to work out, okay, people are getting that one wrong. Maybe we need to iterate that menu structure or change that label and things like that. So after we did all of that work, we were sort of off the project for a while. At that point, they engaged a vendor to sort of build the whole system. It required a lot of back-end integration. It was like 22 different systems that our portal had to go and get data from. Once they had finished that build process and they were ready to pretty much launch the site, we then conducted more testing. So we tested the whole thing after it was developed. But because we'd done all that prototype testing early on, at that point we weren't finding really big sort of issues. We were finding little things like, the hero image is a little bit big, or maybe the menu is a little bit sensitive. So by doing that early testing, we found a lot of the big ticket items early on. So this is the sort of final product. We had a responsive student portal. The feedback was really great. The students loved it. They could get in, get everything in one place in order to do their sort of daily tasks as a student. So just pulling that all together, just a bit of a recap. What is UX design? It's really an approach that puts the customers first. It's understanding who they are, the task, the technology, and the environment in which they operate. It's about involving your customers or your users in that user-centered design process. And it's called all different things depending on what you're designing. It could be UX design, CX design, EX, HCD, human-centered design. It's all pretty much the same thing. But it's a little bit different to UI design, which is more about designing the interface. So UX design is also about designing experiences, not just the screens. So if I order something on an e-commerce website and those goods don't arrive, that's a poor user experience. So to me, UX design is broader than just the interaction with that system. And it also involves a wide range of sort of widely accepted common methods. So hopefully you have a better understanding now of what is UX design. In our next lesson, we're going to talk about, is the UX career right for you?